let's just do a quick overview of the basic things that you can do with a list of variables. So first, you can create an empty list this way. This is the normal pattern where this is a data type, this is a variable name, and then on the other side of the equals sign is the value that you want to save inside your variable. So normally your data type, you're used to seeing something like string or int. Here, ArrayList means that we're going to actually create a whole list of variables that's going to be saved inside this one variable name. But you have to tell it what kind of variables are in your list. So we're going to make a whole list of strings, and that's why you have a string here between these triangle brackets. So this is the data type, which means that we're going to have a list of strings. The name of the variable I'm going to call my list, or rather your list. And then on the right-hand side of the equals, this is how you can create a new empty list. So when you do that, your list is now pointing at an empty list whose size is 0. It contains nothing. So then if you say your list.add, what that does is it puts a new variable inside your list, and it always adds to the end. So here when I say list.add a, now my list is length 1 and it contains a. And then if I say your list.add b, that adds another thing to the list at the end, b. And then when I say your list.add c, that adds another thing at the end of the list, c. So your list refers to the entire list of things, but the list has lots of variables inside it. So you might be wondering, how do you access the individual things that you've added to your list? And the answer is each thing has a location. The location numbers always start with 0. So 0 is the first thing you added to your list, 1 is the next thing you added to your list, and so on. These location numbers have a name. They're called indexes. So I might say, for example, what's located at index 1? And the answer is B is at index 1. But I'll probably say location numbers for a while until we get used to the idea of indexes. The other piece of vocabulary to know is the word elements. I would say that this list has 3 elements, which just refers to the things in the list. So this is the element B, this is the element C. You could say this is the element at index 2. So elements just means things in the list, and indexes means locations in your list. All right, so I showed you how you can make a new empty list. I showed you how you can add things to the list. There's some other basic things you might want to do. You might want to ask the list how big it is, how many things are in the list. And then you probably want to be able to get things out of the list, because otherwise it's not helpful to put things into them. So the way that you ask the list how big it is you have the name of your list variable, your list, and then you say .size. And that's your way of asking the list for its total length. In our case, the size is 3. So here, S is going to have the value 3 now. Save it in there. Okay, so how do you get things out of the list? What you do is you get them by their location number. So what you have to put inside the parentheses here is an index or a location number for the thing that you want to get. So, for example, if I said, let's get 1, what the list would do is it would find index 1 and it would return B. And so we could have a variable here on the left which would save whatever was inside location 1. So let's call this string mine. So now B would get saved inside mine. But if I wanted to have a different number here, like 2, then the list would say, what's in location 2? Oh, it's C. And it would take that string C, and that would get saved into your variable. So the get method is how you can ask your list to return things at different locations. You might be wondering, what happens if you give it a location that doesn't exist? What happens if I try and get the thing at location 3, but there is no location 3? Or what happens if you try and get the thing at location -100? When you do that, it's an error, and it's specifically called an index out of bounds error. Hopefully that name sort of makes sense. Index is a location. Out of bounds means that it's not inside the valid locations for our list. So if you ever see an index out of bounds exception, that just means it's an error where you've asked for a location that doesn't exist. You might want to get the last thing out of the list. And that might not seem to be hard because in this example, all you do is you look to see what's the number of the last thing in the list, and then you get whatever's at that number. But the problem is, very frequently you'll be using lists that have hundreds of thousands of things in them, and you didn't create them yourself. Instead, you loaded them from a file, or you got them from somewhere else. So you won't actually know in advance what number to put here. So the usual way to get the last thing from the list is to use the size of the list itself. So you ask your list how big it is. So here I've done that, and I've saved it inside S. But notice that if I was going to try and put S right here, S is the number 3, and if I try and get the location 3, that doesn't exist. So you can't actually do that, but what you can do is say size minus 1. And the last location in your list is always the size minus 1. Here I've got 3 things in the list, and the last location is 2. Imagine I had 4 things in the list. The last location would be 3. So if I had 100 things in my list, the last location would be 99. So this is the normal way of getting the last thing in the list. And actually what I've done here is I've said yourlist.size and saved it into a variable to be short. What most people actually do is something more like this. In the place where you usually put your location number, that's where they run yourlist.size. Yourlist.size is going to be how many things in the list. Then you subtract 1, and that's the location that you ask the list to access for you. So here I've made a string called last because it represents the last thing, and I'm doing that process. Okay, there's 2 last things I want to show you. One is how you can actually remove things from the list, and the other is how you can loop over everything in the list, which is, I would say, the most common thing that you want to do with lists is loop over all of the things in them. Okay, so if I were to say get 1, what that does is it's going to give me the string B, and the string B gets saved inside mine. But the list doesn't change when I run get. If I was going to say yourlist.remove1, what that actually does is it eliminates that location from the list entirely. So it's like I've crossed it off the list. And it will still return whatever is there. So let's make a new variable for that. String middle. So remove 1 is going to assign B to the middle variable. But what it actually does to the list is it crosses this off, and then everything after that in the list moves up in the list. So actually what I'd have is I'd have C moving up in the list, and that's everything in the list, which is what you would expect to see if you removed the middle element. Remember before it said ABC? If I remove B, it might make sense for everything else to move up. And so that's what remove actually does. So if I wanted to get every single thing out of the list, I could have one get statement for each thing that I want to access. So here I'd get location 0, and then location 1, and then location 2. But what if you have a million things in your list? That's what you'd want to use a loop for. So with a for loop, I'm going to create a variable called lock. And lock is going to start at 0, and it's going to keep going as long as it's smaller than 3. So that means the biggest thing lock will ever be is 2. And each time I go through the loop, I'm going to add 1 to lock. So if I was going to say get location 0, this is going to loop 3 times, and each time I'm getting location 0 out. So that's going to get the letter A 3 times in a row. But what I want is I want the location that I'm getting to change every single time in the loop. So what I can do is I can use lock, because the first time through the loop, lock equals 0, and so this will be just like saying get 0. But then I'll add 1, and the next time through the loop, lock equals 1. So if I say get lock, now I'm getting location 1. So as the number lock goes from 0 to 1 to 2, when I say get lock, I'm getting location 0, then 1, then 2. It's going to be convenient to save the answer into a variable. So let's say string L for letter. And then I could have a print statement where I say letter number and then lock is, and then, oops, L. So what's this going to do? The first time through the loop, when lock equals 0, I'll be saying get 0, which will give me A. And then it's going to print letter number, and then remember lock is 0, so it'll print letter number 0 is, and then L was whatever I got at location 0, so that's going to print A. So the first time through the loop, I'm getting 0, and it'll print letter 0 is A. What happens in the next loop when location is 1? It's going to be getting location 1, printing letter number 1 is equal to, and then whatever letter I got from location 1. What happens next when location is 2? When location is 2, I'm going to be getting 2, which is C, and then it'll print letter number 2 is, and then whatever I had there. So that's what you're doing when you're using the variable lock. It's giving you a different statement every time you go through the loop, but what you're doing is the same thing for each new location. You're getting whatever string is at that location and then displaying it. The last thing to know is usually you don't know how long your lists are, like I was saying last time. So instead of saying lock is less than 3, you might notice that 3 is the same as the size of the list. So the more usual thing to say, instead of start at location 0 and keep going as long as location is smaller than 3, is keep going as long as location is smaller than your list.size. So that's what you usually put in that location. Okay, come back next time and we'll try a bunch of these on the computer.